Alright guys, so chapter 16 here in your book is page 341. So this is some different federal laws that affect real estate. A lot of it has to do with advertising of credit terms in particular. So we'll get right into it on page 341. So first here under the section titled Truth in Lending Act, we focus really on Regulation Z. And what Regulation Z is, it's a full disclosure act. It basically requires lenders to fully disclose the true cost of borrowing money. So if you take out a loan from a bank, this would prevent them from completely and totally misleading you. So they couldn't advertise like buy a house today, $2,000 a month, without making the necessary disclosures. With that being said, there's two types of advertisements. You have advertising of specific terms and advertising in general terms, broad terms. So as an example, a specific term would be saying, buy this house today, it's going to cost you $2,000 a month. Buy this house today, put no money down. You can advertise these things as long as you as the lender are providing full disclosure on the qualifications and things of that sort. The only number that a lender can advertise by itself without full disclosure is what's called the APR, which is the annual percentage rate. So the annual percentage rate is the only number that a lender is allowed to advertise by itself without full disclosure. So again, APR, only number a lender can advertise by itself without full disclosure. Again, other than that, any specific numbers, you must provide full disclosure of the qualifications. And then general advertisements like calls today for a free consultation, calls today to find out why we have the best rates in town, calls today to find out why we have the most loan programs in town. Things like that are fine, no disclosures needed. We're not trying to mislead anybody. We're just trying to just solicit business without trying to give specific numbers to you. So if they ask you what's the only number a lender is allowed to advertise without full disclosure? It's the APR, your annual percentage rate. So if we turn the page here and go to page 342, it covers some of that there as well. And if you turn and go, and that kind of is covered all on that page. So on 342, it talks about some of the things they would have to disclose if you were advertising specific numbers. And there's 4 things listed there: the amount financed, the finance charge, the APR, and the total of all payments. I just want to also be clear that APR and interest rate are 2 different things. Like your interest rate might be 4%. That's not allowed to be advertised by itself. Your APR there might be 4.45 APR. That can be advertised by itself. Why? The APR is your interest rate plus all costs associated with that loan wrapped into one net effective number, whereas your interest rate is like the base rate, essentially. So again, interest rate, APR, 2 different things. All right, and if you turn the page, go to page 344. 344 on the bottom left, it talks about this document called the Loan Estimate Form. So this is a newer document that was put into place about 4 or 5 years ago or so. And with this Loan Estimate Form, what it basically says is that when you as a borrower, when you're borrowing money, within 3 business days of you applying for a loan, a lender must give you a loan estimate form, which is more or less estimating what your closing costs and costs that are associated with that loan are going to be. So within 3 business days of a borrower applying for a loan, the lender must give the loan estimate form. That's something you should write down. And then also, after that, within 10 business days of receiving this loan estimate form, you as the borrower would then have to approve or disapprove of that. If you give no response within 10 business days, it's assumed that you disapproved of that. But again, after you receive this loan estimate form from the lender, you as the borrower then have 10 business days to approve or disapprove of it. And top right here at 344 talks about the closing disclosure form. So for the closing disclosure form, this is a document that the lender must give the borrower at least 3 business days prior to closing. Because what used to happen is you used to walk into a closing, they'd throw down the stack of documents in front of you and you'd sign, not even knowing what you're signing. Well now, if you want to read the documents, which not a lot of people do, but if you want to read the documents, it's required the lender do give you this closing disclosure form at least 3 business days prior to closing. If you're 2 business days prior to closing, you haven't received this yet, then you're not 2 business days prior to closing. This must be given to the borrower at least 3 business days prior to closing. And then next here, on the right side of 345, it talks about the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, what that basically does is it says to a lender, you cannot discriminate when lending money. You can't discriminate on the basis of race, creed, color, sex, national origin. You can't do what's called redlining. Redlining is a discriminatory lending practice where imagine a lender drawing a red line around a certain area saying that being that there's so many minorities there, we're now going to issue either far fewer or loans that have significantly higher, fees and interest rates and things like that in areas of high minority populations. Would that be legal or illegal? Well, we know that would be illegal. So redlining, again, discriminatory lending practice where lenders issue either fewer or they issue loans with disproportionately high fees in areas of high minority populations. That's illegal. The act that's in place to prevent redlining is called the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. What that act does, it would require lenders to fully disclose every single loan they both approve and also the loans they happen to deny as well. For the purpose being that they can, keep lenders in check and hold them accountable for redlining or anything that could be construed as redlining. Also, something that might not be as straightforward with the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, things that may be deemed discriminatory. Lenders are not allowed to discriminate based on somebody's source of income as long as they have a legally verifiable source of income. So, as long as, for instance, if somebody makes $100,000 a year as a drug dealer, that's not going to be counted. But if somebody makes $100,000 a year and part of that income comes from child support, alimony, public assistance money, welfare, disability, things like that, if the borrower wants those things included on their loan application, the lender can't say no. The lender would have to include those things. All right, so next page here, Home Mortgage Disclosure Act on 346. We just talked about that. That's in place to prevent redlining. If you go to 347 on the left side, it talks about the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. This is a federal act that's in place to basically regulate the sales and marketing of out-of-state properties, or in other words, property sales across state lines. So if somebody was selling like 100 lots of property in Florida and they were marketing them in Georgia, this would be an act that would regulate that. So if they ask you what act regulates the sales and marketing of interstate land sales, it's called the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. The New Jersey version of this that we're going to learn about in another chapter is called the New Jersey Real Estate Sales Full Disclosure Act, which basically regulates the sales and marketing of out-of-state properties in New Jersey, and that would be handled by the Bureau of Subdivided Land Sales in New Jersey. At bottom left here for the National Flood Insurance Program, I'll just keep this simple for you. If you're buying a home in a flood zone, you're going to get flood insurance. Now, what this act in particular states is this states here, if you want to highlight the first sentence, it says the National Flood Insurance Program in 1968 was designed to make flood insurance available to property owners and communities that adopt and enforce floodplain ordinances to further reduce flood losses. So basically what this act does, it makes flood insurance available to those who are located in floodplains where their locality has decided to enforce floodplain regulations and things like that. So again, just to make it simple on you, you buy a home in a flood zone, get flood insurance. And bottom right here, 347, talks about the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. One of the main things I would say to know about the disabled is on the test when they ask about if you have a disabled tenant, what is a landlord's obligation to a disabled tenant? A landlord's obligation to a disabled tenant is to make reasonable accommodations. Now that's a very ambiguous term, I totally understand that, and what's reasonable, what's not reasonable is really up to the courts. But if they ask you what is a landlord's obligation to handicapped tenants, the answer is simply to make reasonable accommodations. That would be the landlord's obligation to handicapped tenants. And what the ADA talks about here on the bottom right of 347 is all the different stuff it covers. But the one thing I think that we have to know most importantly is what does the ADA not cover? The ADA would not cover housing. As an example, meaning if I build a single family home, do I have to have a ramp leading up to the front steps? I don't. If I build a single family home, do I have to have a chairlift leading from the first to the second to the third floor? I don't. So the ADA does not apply to housing. Where it would apply, some examples are on the next page here, on page 348. Employment. So if we're at a place of employment, the ADA applies. State and local government buildings. So if we have let's say town hall, borough hall, has to be handicap accessible. Public accommodations. So let's say sports arenas as an example. Public accommodation. Malls. Those things would have to be handicap accessible. Transportation. So if you've ever taken a bus or a train, if you've taken a local bus, they have one of those chairlifts for people in a wheelchair to be able to get onto that bus. So these are just some examples of things the ADA would cover, but I think more importantly to know what it doesn't cover. The ADA does not cover housing in particular. And that's a quick recap on Chapter 16. So again, not a ton there. There's about 15 practice questions in the book for that. As always, the answers are in the back of the book for these chapter quizzes as well. So again, if you guys have any questions, certainly feel free to email me. My email is kylekovats@gmail.com. Thank you.